No, it's a sales pitch for them. So they're highlighting all the best things about their DSO and not saying much about all of the bad things.
Yeah,
right?
and that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool, Jon. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. You guys are doing an awesome job with your podcast and appreciate you extending the invite.
Oh, thanks. So nice. How is it how is it out east? Have you guys gotten your first snow yet?
Oh man, we have not in Boston, but we're a big ski family and Vermont is looking fantastic. Actually, where we ski, it's the most snow they've had on November 18th in history. So we're looking forward to hopefully a snowy and successful ski season up here in the Northeast.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because I just read something this morning that said Denver was it's like the longest it's gone without any snowfall yet, because it's like as recording this, it's like November 18th or something like that. Yeah, and they still haven't had anything. So I don't even know if the mountains have anything yet. I don't know. Yeah. All right. Well, let's dive into the fun stuff. No one cares about our stories about skiing and doing stuff. Okay, so
let's just say first, you need a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of people, say, I want to get around not utilizing a lawyer or anything like that. I can read it or use my broker or whatever. And that is not good advice.
Well, no, I think the first thing what I noticed is, so when we went through this process, I'm sure I've told this 10 times, but pretty much a group of us kind of got together as dentists and we're like, hey, we might want to sell our practices. We were for different reasons. And so we were like, hey, maybe we'll all join up together and we can kind of tackle this as one and see if we can kind of, a couple things. Cut down on workload, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe we can get a better valuation if we all do it at the same time. And we had a couple thoughts behind that. And so first, one of the DSOs that we reached out to, that's a really big one, they were very big on using their in-house attorney. And so I know some groups will do that. I would, like you said, Alex, after going through this, I'm glad we didn't do that. Mm-hmm. You're probably going to pay more having your own representation, but I think it just goes back to the whole, if you wouldn't have a broker that's working both sides, right? You wouldn't have a real estate agent that's working both sides. You want someone that's just representing you. So, Jon, do you ever get in those situations, or are you always you're working with one side?
Well, you got to only work with one side. Super important. It's interesting that you bring up these the DSOs that kind of put out a list of attorneys. I've always struggled with that a little bit with our firm because we happen to be on a couple of those lists, and I'm very hesitant to be on those lists because I think that while we're very appreciative of DSOs looking at our firm and saying, look, this is a type of firm that we feel is very successful and has an aptitude for doing these deals. At the same time, I agree with you. And the reality is that if I were a dentist and I were selling my practice, I wouldn't necessarily want the people on the other side to be saying, hey, you should work with these people, right? Because the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, why, right? Yeah. Is it just going to be a rubber stamp type process? Is it going to be rinse and repeat? Are they going to care about kind of my specific needs? Are they going to really go to bat and negotiate, or do they have some sort of funky relationship with the DSO where they're getting a lot of referrals and deals and they've got to play nice when maybe playing nice isn't the best thing? So I've always struggled with it, honestly, just from a firm standpoint, and we're very happy to not be on those lists.
So but and just so everyone knows, you work, which I think is really cool and why we wanted to bring you on too, is you work on both sides, right? So you work for the private dentist that's trying to sell their practice to, say, either another private dentist or a DSO, or the other side, you'll work with the DSOs that are trying to buy a practice.
Yeah, we've worked with some of the bigger DSOs out there on their buying, right? And so we've represented them. We kind of know what makes them tick, how they think, how they evaluate kind of different issues as it relates to different deals, right? Because you may have the same issue or hot topic that comes up, and they may look at one deal and evaluate it one way. They may look at a different deal and evaluate it another way. And so for us, I feel that experience, having been on the buy side, right? And working with some of the DSOs on their buying kind of has given us a really interesting perspective when we work with sellers, because a lot of times we're able to tell a seller, hey, they meaning the DSO, they may push back on you because of, these couple reasons, but here's why they do it, right? And I'm a big believer, like, in terms of like the why behind it, because as you guys know from what you went through, sometimes the answers that you get are ambiguous or vague or kind of a handshake of the way something might work. And so for us, a lot of it is like why a DSO may act this way in the future, or why a DSO may act in a different way, right? That ultimately, I think we have the ability to do so because we've been on their side of the table.
So, what would be cool? So when we go through all these, we should just, I'm throwing an audible on this. I think when we go through these different parts, we should go through like what's the DSO thinking in this, and then what's the dentist thinking, right? Because he has both perspective, which is really cool. So like when someone's getting ready to say, hey, I want to sell my practice, and let's just, for this topic's conversation, they're going to go down the DSO route, right? Is the first thing they're going to do, like, either they're going to hire a broker that's going to help bring DSOs to them, or they're going to like just cold call and try to reach out to DSOs, right? And it's kind of that getting to know you phase. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, before you go ahead and say, hey, we're going to sign like a letter of intent, right? Where we're actually going to start dating and figuring out if this is actually going to be a deal. Can you go through the process before that?
Yeah, I mean, I think DSOs have gotten so good at marketing, right, that it's very I would love to take a straw poll of the successful dental practices out there that have not, gotten some sort of direct mailer, email, something saying, hey, we've bought practices in your area and we'll pay 200% of net collections, or some, gaudy, sexy type statistic. So I think most people are way more just desensitized, I would say, in terms of interacting with DSOs like now than maybe even 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago, right? And so I think what happens, at least with the clients we work with, there's a lot of like preliminary conversations that people will have just out of curiosity, right? People will say, hey, yeah, I'm tired, I had a bad week, let me just see what a DSO has to say, right? And then what typically happens is things get real fairly quickly, right? Numbers get discussed, processes get discussed, and most times people who are looking to sell say, look, I'm a smart person, I'm a successful person, but I also know what I know and don't know what I don't know, right? And that's when they'll either reach out to us on the legal side, they'll reach directly out to a broker. Sometimes we have people that come to us and say, hey, introduce us to, a broker who does a good job with DSOs. So I think there's a lot of preliminary conversation that's happening these days, more than maybe historically has happened. But I think ultimately most people tend to find their way back to some sort of an advisor to help navigate, like, from those initial conversations up to when it's time to talk about a letter of intent.
So when you're talking to that DSO first, right? So what we did is, right, before we sign any LOI or anything like that, and before we even brought on a broker or talked to you guys, like, we talked to a couple of just the bigger DSOs, and they did come back with preliminary numbers and, hey, send us some of your financials, and we send that, and they're like, hey, we could give you probably a multiple around this, and this is kind of what you could be looking at in terms of how much money you could get, like, this is the structure of the deal. I mean, I would assume, and this is coming, so I want you to put on like the DSO lens right now. I would assume they're not probably giving you their best offer first, right?
Not even close.
Okay.
And honestly, I think you could even make an argument that those initial, like, that whole preliminary, like, dating process that I was talking about before, you could almost make an argument that that's a waste of time, right? Because the reality is that from from the standpoint of someone looking to sell, you kind of know that they're not putting their best foot forward. You don't even know what might be out there, right? And from the DSO's standpoint, they're kind of coming in saying, look, we'll kind of, put something out there. We'll try to get, create some interest, create some excitement, talk about how great we are, talk about why we're different than every other DSO. And the reality is they probably think, or at least assume, or they're keeping something in their back pocket because they assume you're going to go and bring someone on. I think that one of the interesting things is that a lot of times people will have the conversation early on with DSOs by themselves because they're like, you know what, I want to just like get to know these people, who's behind this DSO. Like, I want to make sure that it's the right like fit, that I've got a good relationship. And I think what a lot of people don't fully recognize is that like the people they're talking to, there's no guarantee they're going to be here tomorrow or like a week from now or 5 years from now when you actually need them. And so I think there's like this like a little bit of a, it's almost like a cognitive dissonance where you like feel like for yourself, you're like, I have to do my diligence and get to know these people and like really feel comfortable. But the reality is that like probably not as helpful as you think it is.
Oh yeah. I mean, it even worked. I mean, we've experienced that too. Like with some investment stuff we've done that say isn't traditionally like, hey, I'm going to open a Schwab account and do that. Like I didn't know for a couple of years that like the person you're talking to is like the salesperson, right? Like you're not talking to the operator, right? And I think that's the same thing in DSOs. Like you're talking to their like business development guy or someone whose job it is to get sales to then pass it along. So like, I get your point. They may know some things about the DSO. They may not know the answers though to all the questions that you're actually trying to ask. And the other point is they're not the decision maker, right? And I think it is important.
No, it's a sales pitch for them. So they're highlighting all the best things about their DSO and not saying much about all of the bad things.
Yeah,
right?
and that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then,
and even then, like I think it also just like to me, it's the reason why people do that is because they just want to say like fit wise, culture wise, like I know that if I really enjoyed my meeting with DSO X and meeting Jimmy. Right. And I'm so pumped that like I felt a connection to Jimmy. I know that if like things go sideways, like I'll be able to reach out to Jimmy and he'll help me make it work. Like that's not the way like Jimmy could be gone in 2 weeks or a month or a year. And like the reality is like it's just not it doesn't work that way.
That's like so you because you're an attorney and I feel like you guys get built this way, right? And like Alex, because her dad was an attorney, and I feel like you're more that way, is like you guys seem both very good at like taking out the emotional side of it, right? Like it's a business deal. And I think a lot of dentists, or probably myself more, I'm probably more one who's like, I'm going to talk to this guy because then I'm going to get, I'm going to
a good feeling about it.
Feeling, I'm going to be good. Sure. And then I mean that you have to learn to separate that. And I think it's tough for some people to realize like that's not a bad thing. It's just it's what it is, right? And I think it is easy for us as human beings a lot of time to like want that connection. So you're like, yeah, that works. I want to talk to Jimmy, right? He's going to help me out. But like, yeah, you're right. He could be gone in 6 months. I mean, it's what happens. So like we're in Colorado and there's a local DSO here that was trying to grow, and they had their sale. I think he was like, a Shine rep who then turned into a broker who turned into like then helping out a DSO with finding deals, right? Like that kind of a path. And he would just cold walk into our office, right, and say, "Hey, is Dr. Appleseas here? I want to talk to him." And I would kind of ignore him, and then I did reach out at some point, and I was like, "Hey, just like don't come to my office, man. Like,
my staff can see you
selling, but like I don't want anyone to know yet because I don't know what I'm doing yet, and like I haven't made a decision. So like, chill out a little bit." And and so. Yeah, they are pretty aggressive about doing that. But yeah, it was the same play, right? It's like get you hooked in with the emotional side of it and then get you bought in, and then it's a lot easier then to talk about the stuff after because you've already done that. So like, okay, so like moving on to the next phase then. So, you've gone in, you've said, hey, I feel like I've narrowed down my couple DSOs. I feel like this whole process is like when my sisters were in sororities and they were doing rushes, right? Where you have like what do they have,
put
like
the picture
19
on
party or
the
10
picture
party?
On the screen.
Yeah, and it's like you just dwindle down and do all these interviews. But when you get down to like your final couple ones, right? That's when I would assume, John, then you're going into the phase of saying, which one am I actually going to like exclusively date, right? If we kind of use that as like a framework around everything is, who am I only going to date? And that's when you would then enter into an LOI phase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to like from a terminology standpoint, like LOI, acronym for letter of intent, same thing as an offer letter or a term sheet, right? So we can, if people are hearing different terminology, we're kind of talking about the same thing when Eric mentioned LOI. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the consistent aspects of going through a process of selling to a DSO is that there's a lot of work that's involved in it, right? A lot of financial report pulling and sharing and explaining at different stages in the process. It's not just like, oh, I've done this for the letter of intent, now I don't need to. It comes up throughout. And so I think, Eric, to get back to your point, like at some point you do need to whittle things down, right? And go and see what that like leader in the clubhouse, right? That lead horse, right? What they're best able to do, right? And then it's up to you to kind of say, is this what I want? Like, does it meet my needs? You know, and I think one of the things that we always tell our clients is that you need to be really, don't let the tail wag the dog, right? You need to be really clear about what you want and what your priorities are for a sale, right? And not just say, oh, I really like Jimmy from DSO X. Let's see what he puts out on the table and like see if we can kind of get the things we want, right? I think it's really important for sellers to, before they start having these conversations, really to understand like, these are the 3 or 4 or 5 like must-haves, right? And then it makes the conversations with the DSOs much easier, because if there's groups that can't give you 4 of the 5 must-haves, then like why even keep having a conversation, right? And so I think that's a really important kind of thing that we see all the time. Like it's always like the opposite is true. Like the DSO puts out a number and someone's like, oh, I'll listen, but they haven't done the work to think about what they actually want from their transition.
Oh, I still think, and maybe this is just me more being like a conspiracy theorist like hat on, is like I think there's this big thing where like there are some just polar opposite things of like what a DSO wants versus what like the dentist wants, right? Like a dentist is going to want to get out, right? They don't want to be locked in for 10 plus years, right? The DSO wants you to be locked in, right? Because they want a dentist on there. I mean, you could argue that like they would probably prefer to have the dentist stay there long, right? Long runway, right? You hear them say that. But like there are certain things that I feel like the DSO doesn't want to play their hand and say that because they want to get deals, and then the dentist doesn't want to say that they don't want that because they want a deal. And I kind of feel like, having gone through this, there's a few things where it's like, you know, like we were both kind of afraid to like who's going to say it first because you still want a deal to happen. So I still feel like there's some like bridges.
So let me clarify then, because the reality is that just because you have your 5 priorities doesn't mean you're going to get your 5 priorities. Like you're not going to dictate terms to a DSO. They've got investors. They've got a whole bunch of other people who have sold in. They can't do cookie cutter deals for everyone and bespoke, like one-off. Yeah, we'll give this to Eric and we'll give this to Alex and we'll give this to, you know, any other seller. So, and that's one of the things that I think we try to do at our firm is say, great that you want that. Just know that no DSO is going to give that.
Oh, right? I remember you telling us that. There were a few things.
You had a big list.
Because like what every dentist comes in, I mean, I see it on Facebook groups. They're like, so is there a DSO that's going to buy me 100% and like a 7x multiple and I can leave in a month? It's like, like no, that doesn't happen, right? Like that, you're not going to get that.
Right, but just to drill down on that for a sec, like we've seen it all the time where someone says, look, it is super important to me because of whatever reason, whether it's getting rid of debt, whether it's because they want to, you know, they have, you know, earmarked their cash for something, right? Where they say, look, I need to get a certain amount of cash, right? I need to get, you know, and so if you go into it knowing that, if that's your goal, then like some groups may say, look, the way we do our cash equity split is such that like we just can't go above X%. Another group may say we have more flexibility. Like, Eric, you're right. They're not going to give you 100% cash, but like maybe there's a group that is able to do 80% cash. Whereas other groups are like, sorry, all we do is 60% cash, 40% equity, right? So there's like little subtle pieces like that. You know, for another example would be employment. You're right. A lot of people would love to not have any sort of post-closing employment, you know, obligation, right? But most groups require at least 5 years. There's some that you could get to 3 years, right? There's some, and so if you have like requirements that say, look, I can't commit longer than 3 years, well then why are you talking to a group that only does 5 years, right? Like there's certain things that you just can't change. And so that's why I think it's so important. And this dovetails a little bit with like the brokerage conversation, right? Of like hiring a broker. It's like, it's so much simpler to go to a broker and be able to say, hey, these are the 5 things that I really need to have. Like, who are the right groups that can deliver that, or come to us, right? And say those things to us, right? And I think that can be a lot more effective and efficient for people than just like doing it the opposite way, which is like waiting for people to come to you, having conversations, not being forthright about what you want, and then people get frustrated.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you said with DSOs, you have to think of them. They are a big corporation, right? They have investors. They have people that they are going to have to, pay back with stuff too. And it's kind of like, it's like if you were going to go to a Chick-fil-A and you were like, but I want a burger, right? And it's like, but their model isn't burgers. So like, if you really want a burger, then just drive past the Chick-fil-A, right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
You just have to know what you actually want. If you like our podcast, check out Alex's newsletter, Just 2 Minutes. It's full of great advice, which makes sense considering it's her thoughts and not me sidetracking her every 2 seconds. You can subscribe at coupleofdentists.com. The link is in the show notes. Now, back to the pod. Go ahead.
Or, Eric, it's like, I love your Chick-fil-A, and I'm like, my mind was like, with the Chick-fil-A reference, but it's like, if you're like, hey, I don't really treat myself to fast food, but like every Sunday on my way home from like wherever I am on a Sunday, I'm gonna stop and get myself like a chicken sandwich, right? Don't go to Chick-fil-A. They're not open on Sundays.
Yeah.
Right? Don't set yourself up where you're wanting something or expecting something. And if you go and write to Chick-fil-A and say, to your point, hey, I really want a burger, but I also really want to be with you, or I really want to come to your restaurant on Sundays, but I really want to be with you. Like, they're going to say, sorry.
They're going to say, we appreciate that. Please try our chicken sandwich. Yeah.
Right.
It's very good.
Yeah.
On Monday through Saturday. Please try our chicken sandwich on Monday through Saturday.
Yeah. And I mean, it works. So yeah, I just think I feel like maybe part of your unintended job as an attorney and dealing with all this is probably like putting a therapist hat on sometimes, because I feel like a lot of us dentists, we just aren't right. A lot of us don't have MBAs. We don't have finance degrees. We don't have law degrees. We have bio degrees, right? And we went to dental school, right? We don't know a lot of like what deals mean. We haven't seen hundreds of deals like you have. So I think a lot of us, because we are uneducated in it, right? Or ignorant, whatever you want to say in that field, we come in with these pipe dreams because you hear of something where either it's marketing from a DSO that they're like, oh, you get all this, right? Or they hear it in a Facebook group where some friend said they got this deal. And so you go in asking for things without sometimes understanding what you actually can or can't have. So I would imagine that's probably a fun aspect of the job, is just tempering expectations.
It's an aspect of the job.
Yeah.
Fun, I don't know, but it's an aspect of the job. I always say we wear 3 hats. One is legal and being a good lawyer. The second is project management, because as you guys know, it's a pain in the butt to get from point A to point Z, and a lot of twists and turns. And then the third is therapist, right? And it's kind of helping to, the challenging part on the therapy side is that, you guys have put your blood, sweat, and tears into something, right? Like you've created something. You've created something of value that people want to buy. Like, you should be able to, get what you want, so to speak. But the reality is that that's not the full way that the world works, right? And so it's up to us to then say, okay, this is what you guys want. Let's kind of fit it into the buckets, right? Like that a DSO is willing to give, and let you know, here, this is the best that can happen. And if it still makes sense for you, great, we'll move it forward. If it doesn't make sense for you, then maybe it's either not the right time to sell, or maybe it's not the right type of deal, right? Because there's other types of transitions out there.
Well, yeah, Alex, you always said too, you're like, you sell a practice or anything when you actually don't need to sell it too, right? Like, you never want to be desperate, right? I feel like that's probably not a good idea. I don't think we were in our situation, right? It was more like maybe the timing's right and where we were at, but we didn't have to sell the practices.
You don't ever want to put yourself in that situation where any deal you have to take, because then that's obviously, you're never going to get the best deal out of that if you're stuck.
And it's like coming from a point of weakness, right?
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
So I'll dial it back in on LOI stuff. So what do you normally see when you when you get an LOI, right? When we got ours, I remember it was like 1 or 2 pages. It's very, I don't know if brief, you can lawyer me in this, and I want to say the word brief, but I feel like brief maybe isn't the right word. Maybe like my point is there's like pieces of information there. It doesn't go into detail.
Yeah, it's not the full picture.
Yeah. Can you explain what you should expect to see in an LOI?
Yeah, I think LOIs are there's a broad spectrum, frankly, of what you see with an LOI across different groups. Some groups, it's like a page and basically just says, doesn't even necessarily give you a number, just says like, we'll pay you X multiple on your EBITDA, right? And it really doesn't get into much detail beyond that. Some we've seen don't even put the amount of time that you have to work after closing. Like you can have really, really, really concise LOIs, right? Or you can have LOIs that are 10 to 15 pages, right? Which are much more kind of bigger and meatier and kind of it almost gets into some of the quasi-legal stuff, right? Probably the bell curve is somewhere in the middle, but I think a lot of times people sometimes get excited about the shorter ones. Oh, it's an easier thing to sign, like as a shorter LOI. From my standpoint, that just means that like it's more crap that we're gonna have to deal with.
You're just kicking a can down the road,
right?
And
I think I think Alex, it might have been you were talking about kind of leverage or Eric, and the reality is that before you sign the LOI, that's when you actually do have the most leverage. And so for us, like there are certain things that we do like to see in an LOI, and there's certain things we know that if they're not in an LOI, they're very hard to change. Now, one of the most frustrating things from our position is that we have clients who sometimes will look at the LOI and the fact that it's non-binding and say, it doesn't really matter, right? Okay, yeah, you know what? It said 5 years of employment, like it's non-binding. I'll deal with it later. Like that's absolutely the wrong approach. From our standpoint, like you should only be signing a letter of intent if you, barring something unforeseen, right? If you're literally willing to accept every aspect of that, right? Like if you're saying my number for a purchase price is $5 million, right? And they put in $4 million, right? Don't be like, oh yeah, like we'll get into this thing and I'll negotiate it later in the binding legal contracts and we'll just change the 4 to a 5 and it'll be fine. Like it's not going to be fine, right? And it's going to be a waste of everyone's time. So I think the first, like on a very macro level, first thing is like, don't sign an LOI that you aren't comfortable moving forward with. Okay. The second thing is like, when it comes to like what to look for in an LOI, I think, look, purchase price is important, right? The terms of your kind of how that purchase price is structured, right? What amount is cash? What amount is equity? Are there any what are called like earnouts or like contingent payments? Like if you have EBITDA of X, we'll pay you an additional Y dollars, right? Like how is the money set up? That's one thing that's important. Another thing that's important is kind of the employment side. Is there some sort of a minimum employment term? What's your compensation look like, right? Another thing that we always like to see is what are the non-compete terms, right? Like what does that piece look like? Another thing that we like to see in an LOI, right, and that we focus on a lot is exclusivity, right? How long is that period where you have to take your practice off the market, right? We've seen some, normal I would say is like ballpark like 90-ish days, right? Sometimes you'll get a little less, 90 to 120 days. Like that's not going to, get us all riled up. And we've seen, exclusivity periods of like 6 months or 9 months. And it's like, man, that's a long time to take your practice off the market, right? If things don't come together. And so there's definitely things that we like to focus on in the LOI. And those are just a few of them.
Do you think that a shorter LOI that's not as detailed, I know later it's more work because you have more things to go into. Do you think that opens up the DSO to like more negotiation on certain points? Like if the employment details aren't in there, then maybe they're willing to like.
Yeah. What does it mean? I guess what does it mean when they don't?
I would. Yeah.
Yeah. When they don't put something in, is that because like what's
there's wiggle room?
Yeah. What's
or,
the DSO's like thought process behind that?
So I'll answer that. I'll answer that from the seller side.
Okay.
My feeling is that I hate using it's almost like that half pregnant. Like I hate that that metaphor. So I'm trying to think of a better metaphor. But it's like the further along you are in a process, right, the more pot committed you get. And I think there's a feeling sometimes with DSOs that like each step of the process, oh, we get them to sign a letter of intent. We get them to provide all their, financial reporting, right? All their, diligence requests. Like the further along they can get into a process, right? The more pot committed a seller becomes and the more likely they are to just kind of move forward, even if things aren't exactly the way they want. Right now, I'm not saying that is like why. I don't want to get too deep into like the psyche of a DSO and like why they might, right? Because there could be other reasons why they'd want to, but I think that's the reality, right? And so it always makes me a little bit nervous because I actually think, Alex, the opposite of what you just said. I actually think that if there's less negotiation on the LOI up front, it actually leads to less negotiation in the contracts itself, right? Because you just have less leverage at that point, right? And you're pot committed. I prefer, speaking from the seller side, we actually prefer when LOIs are a little bit longer, right? And have a little bit more meat to them because it enables us to like, before we get stuck in like a legal back and forth, it enables us like with the DSO's business folks more front and center. It enables us to kind of talk about some of these things earlier on that we would normally have to wait for. And we're actually able to get better results most of the time up front, right, than we would be just dealing kind of directly with their legal team kind of later on in the process. So I actually prefer, it sounds kind of maybe a little bit like oxymoronic, but I actually prefer a longer LOI. And I think it's going to be better. Now that's not to say though that like if you get a shorter LOI, like
yeah,
it's a problem, right? It's just depending on DSOs, right?
Yeah.
All things equal. Though.
It seems like a longer LOI, they have to show more of their cards. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, you want information.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it's like peeling back layers of the onion. I mean, you guys know, like selling to a DSO there's so many layers to that onion. So many different puzzle pieces that fit together. Like this component of the deal impacts this other component of the deal, right? Like what happens with your employment impacts what happens with your equity. The way your equity is structured impacts the tax side. Like it just all is one big puzzle piece. The more you see up front and the more you understand, presumably the better off you're going to be.
So let's say now you've signed your LOI, right? And now you're going into that 90 to 120 day phase where it's like you're going to due diligence, right? Is that the correct term you would probably say?
Yeah.
And so then when you're doing that, that's when stuff can kind of move fast too, right? Like you've got your attorneys are like very involved, like more day to day with stuff, right? Can you go through once the LOI is signed and like you've engaged legal and they're there? What are the like next steps that you can see in that process?
Yeah. So first, I would always say engage legal before signing an LOI.
Yeah.
Like that's super important to engage legal before signing an LOI. Once an LOI is signed, like we look at it almost like think of like the Olympics 4x100 track and field, like a relay, right? And like there's the guy who's running or the woman who's running, you pass the baton to the next person. And like there's this moment of time where the person who's running is like in the process of giving over the baton. And then there's that like fraction of a second where both sides are touching it. And then, the next runner takes off. Like that LOI part is kind of like when both sides are touching the baton, right? Okay. Like there's this LOI piece where it's kind of like your broker or financial advisor, transaction advisor, and legal are both holding the baton, that is that LOI. Once that LOI is signed, kind of legal takes the baton and is really quarterbacking the deal going forward. Now, usually what happens is there's almost like two separate processes that run in parallel. They don't necessarily start at the same time, but one is like a financial diligence process. That's where like the DSO will kind of get all the financial reporting, sometimes have an outside company do what's called a quality of earnings or a Q of E, which effectively enables them to verify the numbers and the EBITDA that they're basing their purchase price off of. And then the other parallel track is legal, right? And I think can move very quick. Like from signing an LOI, it's very possible to close a deal in like 60 days. And that's surprising for people. Some people come to us and they're like, oh wow, like it's November. I'm hoping I can close by, June. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, if you get an LOI, we could close in January, kind of a thing, right? I think people are surprised by how quick it is. But as you guys know, like it's a heavy lift for someone who's selling. Like, I mean, you guys can probably speak from like, I empathize a lot with our clients because you guys are working full day schedule. Like it's not your business stops. And at the same time, you're getting peppered with all sorts of requests and stuff as well. So, I'd be interested from your guys' standpoint, what worked for you? What was successful for you? How did you guys manage that process?
I just liked it more. Like, so for me, I always look back and I'm like, this was so much fun. Like literally in like a second life or an alternate life, I could easily just do that kind of stuff all day. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's like solving a big puzzle, right? Like I really had a fun time with that. So like I probably took the route of like, oh wait, I can like work a half day today clinically to do more like go through like Amazon purchases and figure out how I add stuff back. Yeah, sign me up. Because I kind of was telling Alex like, there's really not another point in your life where every like dollar you can save or say add back to what your profit is, you can get a 6 or 7 times return on that. Like that's nuts, right? Like you may not get 100% cash, but like that conversion's crazy. So for me, I was like, wow, my time is super valuable focusing on this, right? I could either, like technically, I could either do a crown, get paid 30% of that, say it takes me like an hour, right? And that's what, $450, right? I made. Or I could spend an hour and if I went through like my Amazon purchases and found like $500 of personal stuff there and I got like a 6X on that, right? It's like $3,000. It's like, where was my time better well spent? And for me, that's kind of like the lens I looked at it through. So like I enjoyed that. And I also wanted to slow down clinically, right? So I don't think I was like, oh man, this is taking time away. I want to work more clinical. But I think my perspective is unique on it because I don't know if everyone thinks that same way or not, but
everyone does not think that same way.
Yeah. That was mine.
Alex,
right?
you must be so proud to have a husband who was happy to dive in and
but I made no money
do the conversion rate.
We made no money, and all of it also was Alex. What's this purchase? Alex, what was this for?
Yeah.
Alex, what was this for? So really, I was the one that was doing it.
Husband, it ended up just going back to like, hey, can you help me out with this?
Yeah.
Exactly. But the thought of doing it was so exciting. Sure. But we can't do anything for ourselves. We need our trusted spouses to help us find our way.
Yeah, totally. So like for me, I think I enjoy doing that part. But yeah, it is overwhelming.
It's a lot of work.
It is like an extra job. Like the Saturday, Sundays, you're spending your nights going through. Like you said, because if you're taking it from the perspective of, man, like every penny I can save here is going to add up, right? Like I'm going to spend my time doing that. But yeah, it does become like you already have your full-time job and like you said, you're trying to run your practice. You're trying to keep staff happy, right? Like you don't want to, it would freak me out because as we were in due diligence, I was like, shit, I can't lose an associate because what if that gets back and like production dips? Is that going to cause an issue, right? And then you spiral, right? And you're like, well, if I lose an office manager and then production dips, are they going to look back at that? And then so like you're constantly stressing out about that stuff. You're still trying to keep the practice going, and then you're trying to get all this stuff done, and you're trying to do it all secretive too, man. You don't know how many times I was like, if any of my team was listening to this when we were in the process of selling, they would be like, oh, that's why he took calls outside all the freaking time? Like, all the time. And it was like, when we were doing this, it was like February, March, too, and it was like freaking cold out, and I just had like my scrubs on, and all the time I was like, yeah, the Wi-Fi's not working great in here. I need to take a call outside. And it was like, to call John or to call JW, our broker. And so there's a lot of stress with doing all that and keeping it a secret because what if the deal doesn't go through? Now my team knows that I want to possibly sell. If I'm in their perspective, and it's not a bad thing. I would do the same thing if I were in their shoes. I'd say, whoa, I like stability, right? Okay, this doctor might be selling. If he's selling, do I need to look for a new job? And what if I couldn't sell, right? So I didn't want to do that. That wasn't my intention. I wasn't like, oh, this is fun. I get to keep a secret from everyone. But it's one of those like, unnecessary, like it's like a necessary evil, right? That you kind of have to do.
Yeah, or the conversation where your, assistant or someone's like, "Hey, can we talk about a raise?" And you're like,
Oh,
"Don't
God.
talk to me. Don't talk to me about anything right now." Like,
yeah, that was tough too, because I was like, "Oh God, we're gonna have to talk about this." Like, yeah, I'll give it to you in. What's that?
Yeah, when are we closing?
John, when are we closing? Yeah, let's talk about it on September 2nd.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of those too. But yeah, I think to your point, it is pretty stressful. Yeah.
I would say one of the like, if we're gonna like do a takeaway from like that, like post LOI, like financial diligence, I would say the big takeaway I would have is that it's so important to like get your house in order like before, right? Like you guys were super unique, and I've seen all shapes and sizes. So, but you guys were really unique. You guys had your shit together, right? You guys really understood your business. You understood your P&L. You understood expenses and where stuff was coming from. Like, and so that's one of the things that made it, Eric, enjoyable for you, right?
Yeah.
To go through it, because it wasn't just like looking at like scribbles on a piece of paper, right? You understood your business. It's so important, if you don't have your business in order. It's okay, right? Like most people don't have a full good grasp on their financials and the way their business operates. But like, try to get your house in order as much as possible, like before, like even starting on the process of selling, before LOI, before even like the pre-LOI dating we were talking about, because it can make all the difference in the world. And it's not just to make things smoother and simpler, right? Which it does. Eric, to your point, it helps you get to that arbitrage of like knowing where that dollar is that can turn into $7, right? And that just comes from having good organization and good clarity.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Alex kind of preached about too a lot, was like, and anyone we talk to that's like, hey, we tell them about our situation, like, what would you do differently? Like, we did plan ahead. We probably would have even planned even further ahead, right, than we did, because it is a lot. I don't know, like what's the one quote on like, like when you kind of plan ahead, it makes it easier on the back end, right? Whatever that phrase is there, but like the fact that we already knew what a lot of our supply costs were, where our lab costs were, where we could kind of like, we understood it before, so when we had to look at it again, we already knew what we were kind of getting into. And I mean, so that we know, right, a lot of DSOs are going to value you. They may look at like your last 3 years tax returns or how your growth has been in revenue, but they're really going to base the valuation and what they're going to pay you on is on your last 12 trailing months, right? So we'll say like TTM, right? And so at least with that part, have all of those dialed in, because that's the part where, and maybe this is more when you're working with your broker on the side of it, when they're saying, hey, we think your profit or your EBITDA, right, is $500,000, right? That's where they're taking that $500,000 from. It's the last 12 months of what you've done. And so that's where we really focused in on that part, right? I feel like the years previous were good to show maybe like trends and maybe like high level stuff, but like the dialing in, you really need to focus in on like the last 12 months. So I didn't want people to think like, man, you got to go in from inception, right? Like you've been a practice owner for 20 years, you need to look 20 years back. No, it's just basically the last year. At least that's what we did.
No, I 100% agree with like one small caveat, which is when it comes to like credit balances, then you do need to like actually like, sometimes people have like credit balances from like 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Like try to get that piece, like definitely look back on those, right? And clean that up and try to make it as tidy and
yeah, we did have to do that.
Man,
You're right. I know
that.
that one was the pain, because
We audited so many things, so many accounts. Yeah, and it just takes a long time.
Yeah.
And like you're the only one doing it.
$2.37 for a patient sounds like painful to go through, but when you have 100, like it adds up. It adds up.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then, we thought too, probably, you're going through, you got your 2 tracks, right? You're going through and you're trying to figure out all the money stuff, which I think that's for like a different conversation. And then you're going through legal. The one piece that I remember you telling us, and you foreshadowed it really well because it actually did come true, was the landlord piece. And you were like, get on that early. And I'm glad we did, because we had two locations, 2 practices. One of them, it was just a guy that owned the building, and he was like, yeah, what do you guys want to do? We'll do this. The DSO can take it over. That's fine. The other one, I mean, John, it took like 2 years post selling to get that thing finally figured out. They were such a they were kind of a pain in the ass on stuff, and I don't know if that's just because they didn't understand it or they were part of some big fund, but like we struggled with getting the landlord to kind of get on board with stuff, and that is one piece that it's like an extra added layer that you really don't have any control over, right? So can you speak on like how to handle or navigate that part?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's two different categories of things that come up on the legal side. There's like the stuff that's between a buyer and a seller. Look, I mean, that's stuff that if you put people in a room for 24 hours, like you'd probably be able to work through all that stuff just because it's between a buyer and a seller, right? And it's all kind of within kind of the control of the people involved in the deal. Then there's the stuff that we call like third party items, right? Or things that involve someone on the outside. The landlords is one big one. Like payoff letters for banks is another big one. And there's some other kind of stuff that falls into those categories. But the landlord ones is particularly sensitive because you want to you have to time it right, because you don't want to start necessarily too soon, right? Because sometimes there's costs associated with, you have to pay to the landlord for like a processing fee, right? And if you don't know if the deal is going to go through or be successful, you don't want to just like start, throwing money all around, right? So you want it to be like far enough in the deal that you have a pretty good sense that things are going to happen. But it's got to be like, at least I would say, like our internal benchmark is 30 days, right? Like you can't be starting that process less than 30 days, right? Not to say it can't be successful less than 30 days, but it just creates a lot of stress. And honestly, there's some really kind of aggressive leases out there that say, hey, you got to give notice of a potential assignment 60 days in advance, right? So like just understanding kind of who your landlord is. Like Eric, you made the point, sometimes it might be simpler to have a mom and pop type landlord and they just say, yeah, no problem, let me sign. But I mean, we're dealing on a deal right now. We've got a small landlord who no one can seem to find. It's kind of like, where's Waldo, right? And
Jeez.
no one can find Waldo. And so we're like, the deal is at risk of being delayed because the landlord just won't respond, right? And so the earlier you start, right, the more buffer you build in just with inevitable delays.
Or just buy your own building, right? And then
or just own your own real estate. But that creates its own other set of other set of complexity. Own other set of complexity.
So then so then you've kind of gone through that. Now you're getting ready to close. I know for us it went from like, and you said this, you're like, there's parts where it's like lulls and like there's not much going on, and then it like just goes fast. Because I remember like we would go back like 10 emails in a day trying to figure stuff out. Is that intentional? Because like when you go to a restaurant and you're like, man, if they just planned everything beforehand, it would never be stressful in the kitchen, right? But like you talk to someone who's like a head chef and they're like, it's stressful every fucking night. Or like you watch The Bear, right? And you're like, holy crap, that's actually how it works. And I feel like is that just reality of how things work? Is it intentional? Is it like, I don't know. I always wondered about that.
I don't think it's like intentional. I don't think it's like a power play by them to kind of jam you at the last minute. I mean, I just look at it from our standpoint. Like, even if we got jammed at the last minute, it wouldn't change like how we operate or what we do. Like we can work super quick or work. So it wouldn't phase us from like a sell side standpoint if that was like a tactic that someone was using to try to jam up. I think there's a couple reasons for it. One, I don't think a lot of lawyers are just very good at project managing, right? And being like, hey, we should have this done by this time, this done by this time, this done by this time, right? I think that's one reality. Look, I think at sometimes these DSOs are closing. Your deal's not the only one, right? These DSOs may be closing a bunch of deals, and they just may not be able to turn their full attention until kind of as things get closer. But it is silly, frankly, like how stressful that final mile is.
Yeah.
I think that it's really. I don't think people necessarily understand the level of just documentation that's involved in these sales to DSOs. Like, I think, for people who have like started up a practice, like the only thing they needed to do is like sign a lease, right? For people who bought a practice, frankly, like those purchase agreements, and we do a lot of private doctor to doctor transitions at our firm, but like those purchase agreements are tiny and simple in comparison to like the loads of documents, 250 plus pages. I think on your guys' deal, we had 25 different documents, right, that were involved. Like, it's just a lot to weed through,
So like,
right, and navigate.
in general, then, what are like the couple main documents you get, right? Like, if you're selling to a DSO, right? Like, it was, I think we had, I should just let you say it, but like, I'm gonna attempt here. There was like an asset purchase agreement, right? And maybe you can say like, what, like, just
Ding.
really high level, what is that, right? You have your employment contract, and that's all I have. So I have two
Those
documents.
are the only two he read.
I think that, yeah, go on, Alex, sorry.
No, I said those are the only two that he actually read.
Yeah.
He made it seem like he read all of them. And he
Yeah.
certainly
That's 'cause
asked
I read all of
questions,
them.
Yeah,
but he
Alex
read
actually
all of
read
them.
all
I
of
read
them.
all
She
of
was the
them.
one that read them. She can, yeah.
And I highlighted.
She can read more than two paragraphs without yawning, and I can't do that.
I prefer to look at it in terms of relationships more than like contracts, right? So I think one of the things that makes DSO transactions so complicated at times is that when you sell or when you buy like a practice from another dentist, usually you have like one relationship, right? Buyer and seller, right? When you sell a practice into a DSO, you can have like 6 different relationships, right? Theoretically, you could have buyer seller, employer employee, partner, right? You could have landlord tenant if you own your real estate and now the DSO is going to be a tenant. You can have a lot of times, like from just a regulatory standpoint, you could have like clinical owner and then management company, right? Like there's a lot of different relationships out there that you have, right? And that can, and there's like documents that follow each of those relationships, right? So that's where things get really complex. And like I kind of alluded to before, it's not just like these independent kind of categories of documents. They all interact in different ways, right? For instance, what happens in your employment agreement and how you get terminated in your employment agreement has a direct impact to in your equity documents, right? What purchase price you're bought out at, right? Like if you get terminated for cause, right? There's going to be something in your equity documents that says, hey, if there's a for cause termination, your fair market value is discounted, right? When we buy you out, right? So everything kind of interrelates to each other. But Eric, to directly answer your point, the main documents would be typically an asset purchase agreement. Then that governs kind of the sale. Then you'd have kind of your employment agreement, which would govern your employment after closing. Then you typically would have like an operating agreement and some sort of like subscription agreement or contribution agreement, which would govern your equity, right? Your rollover equity. You've obviously got the lease documents, that would, either a lease assignment or a new lease that governs the real estate side, right? And then you've got a whole bunch of oftentimes, not always, but a whole bunch of regulatory documents because DSOs just are a pretty convoluted regulatory structure to begin with.
We all know Eric wants more friends. If you're enjoying this episode, share the podcast and then tell them to DM Eric so he can hit his quota of 1 new friend per day. Now back to the episode.
Yeah. So then you sign, you're sold, you get your money, and everything's good, right? That's just how it ends. No, but I mean,
yeah, and exactly, and then everyone rides off into the sunset and has a lot of fun.
What do you see? Just kind of to wrap it up, and I mean, I feel like there's so many like in my head. I was like, man, there's like 10 different offshoots where like we could definitely have you come back on and like dial in on certain stuff or see what people want to hear.
Yeah.
But to kind of wrap it up, then once you've sold, I guess you're not done, right? But like, what are some of the biggest things that you've seen from your clients where they're like, I didn't expect that to happen, but like, what are some of the things that you see happen post sale that like, if you could go back now, having done a ton of these, you'd say like, oh man, I would make sure like I educated the doctor about this before, or like, setting expectations, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, honestly, I think the expectation I think just expectations is the thing that we always preach at our firm, right? Like I think one of the biggest, and this is going to be an overgeneralized point. It's not true for necessarily all DSOs or all relationships, but I think the word partner has really become extremely overused in the DSO world, right? You know, we're not a DSO, we're a DPO. We partner with our doctors,
Oh yeah,
or
dude.
don't
It's
work
how many acronyms has changed since it was like DSO,
Oh,
right? It's like DPO, then we're DSO, DPO, we're DSO 3.0, DSO 4.0, right? It's like it's literally like when I see now there's like SEO, now there's like AEO, and they're like it's just like acronyms people throw out, right? And I feel like when I see that sometimes it's meant as a marketing tool and not necessarily
Yeah, it's still
yeah.
corporate.
we just did a presentation the other day, actually a couple months ago, and one of our slides was like all the different acronyms that
Oh,
we
really?
see, with just like lines through all of them, because at the end of the day, they're functionally the same thing, right? To Eric, you were hit the nail on the head. It's all marketing. But I think that's where people get really stuck, is this like lowercase p, like we partner with our doctors. Like, forget that word, right? There's hopefully some shared incentives to grow the business, because you have equity. The DSO is obviously trying to grow their equity. Hopefully the business continues to grow and you got a great exit, right? But the reality is that other than that, I mean,
Like
it's not like you don't have a seat at the table, right? You're not, if stuff goes wrong, it's not going to be like, oh, Eric, you think this way, or the DSO thinks this way. Let's put our heads together. The DSO is going to say, this is how we're going to do it, right? And so I think that a lot of times people have kind of a set of expectations about what this partnership looks like, right? When in reality, I think that people are much better served not looking at it as a partnership.
should they substitute that with own? Is that a better word?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I wouldn't be a lawyer if I had all the marketing pieces. But I always say, look, you're selling your business. Like, you're selling your business. That's what it is. Let's call a spade a spade. Like, too many people, it's like, I'm not selling. I'm partnering with this other group. No, you're selling to this other group, and that's okay. Like, lean into it. Like, it's nothing to be like
a counter argument on that. So I though think that having gone through it, I think DSOs push, you're partnering with us, right? And I feel like just based on landscape and like kind of what you see post selling, I don't think you can, but I don't know if you can go in it with the mindset of saying I'm selling my practice, because you aren't, right? Like in the traditional sense of like, okay, technically you're selling it, but if you, through people like how they probably interpret that word is more of when I sell something, there's usually a couple things. There's usually like I'm either out in a defined set period, right? And you have all that stuff figured out. I think we've just found post selling that a lot of that stuff isn't really finalized, right? Like I think that's a big challenge that a lot of people maybe have with some of the models is you get stuck with what they call like golden handcuffs, right? And it's like, how do I actually fully exit, right? And I know we talked to you about that like when we were doing our deal, and they're really, I don't know. It kind of seems like, there's some models where it's like you eventually have to sell it to another dentist, right? There's something here, but there's really not a defined term in a lot of these deals where it's like at X amount of months, you are out, right? And so that's why sometimes
design.
I don't think of it as, and if I were to tell someone who is looking to sell or partner or whatever it was, I would say you need to also look at it through the lens of like, you aren't selling from that standpoint. You are kind of partnering, but you're not a partner in the sense that you don't have control, right? And you don't have a majority, right? You still are a minority, so they can still tell you what to do, and that's okay. Just you have to know that and have those expectations.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly.
So yeah, no, I think that would kind of be my takeaway from it on that. But I would think too. Okay, last question, and then I'll let you go. Sorry, otherwise I'll keep you on for like 10 hours on this thing. Because I could just.
We can do it again. We'll do it again another time.
We'll do it again. Do you feel like that is a lot of that where, and this is coming from maybe the DSO perspective on it, is a lot of the, hey, maybe we want to keep it kind of loose on when the doctor can fully exit, right? Because in order for DSOs in most states to function and work, you need to have a dentist with a license, right, to own the clinical entity of it, right? Which is, if you get into more technical terms, it's like a pass-through, right? Like they have to be on the train with you. And I would feel like DSOs would really struggle or have a hard time with that transition if they don't have someone lined up. So do they almost say like I'd love to exit you, but if I do, I don't have a succession plan in place. And if we don't have another doctor that's in this state, like then the office just shuts down because the DSO can't technically own all of it.
I actually think that piece is less hard than you may be thinking.
Okay.
I actually think finding a replacement dentist to kind of own the clinical aspects, within that regulatory structure you're describing it can be done. I think the biggest thing is it's all economics, right? I think it's hard for, anytime there's like a defined period where like you have the ability to control your own destiny of exiting out of a DSO with like equity and requiring them to pay you a certain amount of money, like the DSO has to effectively account for that, right? And make sure that there's reserves that are for that. And for a lot of DSOs, like they'd much rather reserve their capital to go buy additional practices,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or reserve their capital to make sure that they're satisfying their loan covenants, right, with their lender. Or like there's a lot of ways that they would much rather be spending that money than in the book saying, I've got an upcoming kind of almost like debt obligation that I know I'm going to have to satisfy with, all these different sellers. And so I think having the flexibility is people say like, what is it, like cash is king, right? Like I think for a lot of DSOs, like flexibility is king, right? Like, yeah, if it works for a DSO to exit you and buy you out and it works for everyone, great, like no problem. But if they could do things differently or better, right, and repurpose that money elsewhere, they'd be much happier doing so. Now, I do just want to say, like, nothing like, and I know you guys know this, but I just want to like make it clear, like DSOs can be great opportunities for people to sell to, right? Like none of the things that we're talking about today, like even when we've been like moderately like critical of how certain DSOs operate, it's not negative, right? Like we think there's a lot of great DSOs out there. There's a lot of people that have had really successful experiences that we've worked with, who have sold into DSOs. And I think it goes back to what we initially talked about, which is like, be very clear about what it is that you want from your transition, have expectations set properly, and work with kind of a team, that actually knows how to do these deals and can guide you in the right direction.
Nice. All right. My final shout out to you is when we were going through and looking at different attorneys, right? I think the one thing that would always bug me with a lot of attorneys or firms was like, you're always like billable hours, right? And then you get a bill and you're like, holy crap, they just like, how do they spend $20,000 here and do that? The one thing I will say that myself, and I feel like a lot of us that worked with you liked, is that everything was more flat fee based. So it made it a lot less stressful and just easier to know, like on the front end, I am paying this much for these services. If it takes more time, if it takes less time, that's what it is. So just as a side note, I enjoyed that. So thank you for setting your stuff up that way. It was nice.
We are very focused on creating good experiences for our clients and incentivizing our clients the right way. It always bothered me, like when I used to work at firms that had hourly models, like it bothered me that like our clients would have to choose, like, do I want to spend more money and reach out to my attorney, or do I like make the decision myself and just say, hey, I'd rather just, save that. Like I also like bothered me that like if you're paying an hourly rate, like you didn't even want to ask like how your kids are doing, or like how's things out in Colorado, right? Because that's like ching ching ching, like that's like money that's going down.
Well, that's
the drain.
The worst for me because I talk way too much. So like every time I would do that, I'd send an email and I'd be like, I shouldn't ask the second question, right? Because I feel like that was a $50 answer just for him to tell me his kids are doing well. It's like okay, yeah.
Exactly. We never wanted to create that misalignment. So
nice, cool.
I'm glad you found it to be a good structure.
Nice. Well, we'll have to have you come back on and go through some of this other stuff in more detail.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for coming on.
No, it's my pleasure, guys. Appreciate you having me.